I'm Arita, and I'm the co-founder of Mr.Med, which is a startup in the home healthcare industry. What we're looking to do is organize the home medical equipment market and sort of bring together a seamless integration of how healthcare is delivered at the patient's home, especially from an equipment perspective. So whether it is purchasing any basic product like a nebulizer, an oxygen cylinder, wheelchair, or you're looking at renting an entire ICU setup, or you want any sort of remote monitoring to be done at home, there's an entire gamut of things within the home healthcare medical framework. And we as a startup aim to bring that all together so that from a customer's perspective, everything is there to them at one point and in an organized manner. So, and as you know, that I am also a part of Startup Tunnel, which is an incubator program based out of New Delhi. And we are one of the few chosen startups which work with Startup Tunnel for constant networking and work issues. Now, of course, that's how I was introduced to Ford's Accelerator and Wish's workshop also, which was the Minimum Viable Bootcamp, which was conducted last week. It was a 2-day intensive workshop, and I think every minute, every second of it that we spent was put to really, really good use. And, like I said, I'm better armored to just work through the future and now look at things from a different perspective, right? So, like initially, when you're trying to solve a problem, build a startup, trying to provide services, a lot of focus of every founder is within the business, within the startup per se. What should the product look like? What are the features or services that you begin to feel are important for your product? How do you make the most of it? How do you build it in an efficient manner? And of course, those things are important. But very, very often, we tend to skip the actual outsider's perspective or the user's core need when we're doing this. Just to give an example, very basic thing. We gave an example of a company which was trying to focus on training unemployed engineering graduates and making them employable for other IT companies in the startup, which is trying to do this and say building a MOOC platform. Would be focusing on the product, which is the platform, and how would the platform look? How would you execute the training of your students through the platform? The focus would first be on that, and then move towards how can that benefit the small and mid-sized companies that you're targeting. But if you really think about it, and this is something that Wish made really, really clear to us first, that you got to start thinking about it from just create a landscape first. Have all of your users listed down, your target people in the network listed down. So right from students to companies that would like to hire from you, to training institutes, to universities, the whole layout. And then pick and choose how are you benefiting each one of them, and figure out where do you fit in for them and who out of them would value your services the most. So instead of just focusing on the platform, the product, you got to look at what you're trying to do and how what you are trying to do is going to affect every other stakeholder in the network, and how are they going to benefit the most from it, right? Now, that is a complete holistic perspective to things that we often might tend to miss out on. And that is one of the key takeaways that I had from the bootcamp, because after coming out, right, I was able to really map out the entire gamut of stakeholders that I have within the healthcare industry and see how each one of them, whether it's manufacturers, dealers, patients, users, hospitals, entire network, how they will benefit from what we are trying to do, and it's the best way to connect with them for the same, right? Then another thing that I remember, which was very, very fascinating, was a little piece by the story of David and Goliath, and how you can tie that in to your own learnings, how you look at all of these big startup companies, which are like giants in their old field, doing really well, and how startups which are small with limited resources often get overwhelmed by all that is happening around them, especially with regards to larger corporates and big companies. But how you, within your own limited abilities, can do that specific basic task which can create a completely new market or a new service for you. whether you look at the steel industry, wherein we saw a huge growth curve, or for every other, startup as well. Then, so yeah, one very, very key learning and in that was that, most people, most big companies, most established players are trying to focus on the most demanding segments of the market, the ones with the biggest revenue potential, probably the ones which are already overserved, which also have needs which are largely unfulfilled, maybe because of the revenue elements involved or their needs being so peculiar. And most bigger companies are not focusing on that. And you, as a startup, need to first figure out the right place to fit in, where you can make a mark and establish yourself without really disrupting the whole ecosystem to begin with. And once you found that entry point and you start to grow from there, multiply from there, build on a trust and build that credibility, then just pushing forward and exponentially growing would come to you naturally and would just be a natural progression for you. So that was another really, really, really important takeaway that I had from the bootcamp. If I just talk about, one very key assumption, personally from our startup perspective, that I completely moved on from after the bootcamp was just defining my target customer, right? Now, of course, since what you're doing is in healthcare and your focus and who you're trying to serve is your patient, right? But there needs to be a differentiation between who is going to be the user of the services you're providing and who is going to be the customer, the decision maker, the person you're going to be targeting for these services. Now, when we used to define our customer persona earlier, it used to be very, very patient-centric, right? Essentially, that's who you're trying to serve. But it's only after the bootcamp that I could separate the two personas and realize that, okay, on one hand, you have a user, which is where your services are targeted for, which is your patient. And then you have a customer, which is a different persona, who is actually going to get in touch with you and who is the one who's going to be taking a decision and actually a call on whether to, sign you up or not. So that clear understanding and differentiation between who your target customer is, who are the different users of your product is very important. And that's something that, again, the bootcamp really helped me understand. Okay. And one of the most important things that just doesn't leave my mind now is each time that I think of my solution and product now, there's one basic question that I try and ask, that is it affordable, usable, useful, and unique? Four very, very key aspects which would make a startup a success, which would make a startup different from the others in the market. Right? Yes, you're trying to build something, you're trying to solve a problem, but you need to assess whether what you're trying to do is, first of all, useful. Secondly, is the solution you're giving really usable and convenient for the people who are trying to use it? How affordable is it given your target segment? And how unique and different it is from what they already have available. So again, a very, very big key takeaway, right? And keeping all of that in mind, right, that has now viewing my own business model also from this perspective. So now suddenly I'm not just looking at the service I provide, I'm also looking at A, how the user is different from the target customer, B, how there are at least 7-8 other stakeholders within the network that will benefit or have an advantage because of my service. And these are not just patients and customers alone. There are a larger ecosystem at play, which I can leverage on and really build on, right? And thirdly, of course, how what I'm trying to do has the potential to really grow into, like we said, a big banyan tree and tomato plant. How to fit in right within this larger ecosystem of things, right? And of course, when you have that perspective on things, right? Another thing was that Wish had provided us with this startup business brief. Okay, it's a bunch of questions. It's nothing but just questions focused on the problem you're solving, your customer, your users, the uniqueness of your solution, the competitors, the pricing, everything, right? And These are really, really basic one-line questions, which really, if you start to read and start to probe on, will suddenly open your eyes to things that you weren't really focusing on or thinking about. I still have that business brief with me. I filled it once with my co-founder, and that was just last week. And now, post this session and post seeing how enlightening it was to just use that brief, I know that every once in 3 months, I'm going to sit and review what I wrote, see how far I've come from there, and how much has the business evolved just as using that brief as a base. And of course, I've said a lot about what all I learned and how it benefited me. And I just like to add that I think anybody who is really considering to make a mark in any segment or industry and really disrupt things or bring out something really beautiful and create something really strong, robust, and steady should definitely consider attending this bootcamp. Should really, really seriously focus on whatever that's being said. Try and correlate it to the problem that you are trying to solve, the startup that you're trying to build. And there is no chance in hell that this will not benefit you as a founder. So definitely would like to say that it was one of the most enriching experiences within the startup ecosystem that I've had. And I'd like to recommend it to everybody who's looking to build something.